What is up, fellow Neopians? My name is Chili. Welcome back to my channel. With all the drama of TNT telling us that they are delaying the Void Within plot for some unknown number of months, it got me thinking about all of the different plots that we've resolved previously on Neopets.com and started to compare them to our current plot. I thought it might be fun in this video if we went through and did a little evaluation on some of the past plots and events that have happened on Neopets.com, and then gave them a ranking system so that we could rank all of the plots from S tier to D tier and talk about them in some detail. So you might now be asking yourself, what in the hell is a plot? Well, a plot is a large-scale site-wide event that does things like introduce us to new lore, new pet species, sometimes new lands, and if we're lucky, sometimes it also gives us new mechanics or ways that we can interact with the site. Plots are a big deal. For a long time, they have been what has driven forward site improvements and given us new and exciting things to be able to do within the world of Neopia that we love so much. And for a while, we didn't really have a full-fledged plot up until the Void Within came out. So what meets the criteria for a plot? Well, in this video, I'm going to be doing the actual whole-ass plot lines all the way down to some of the mini plots that I felt like had enough content for me to be able to cover with the criteria that we're going to give it. There also might be some non-plot events, I guess we could call them, thrown in here. As long as it's not an annual event like the Altador Cup or the Festival of Negs, I did not include any of those reoccurring annual events. And then I put whatever else I wanted in here because it's my channel and nobody can stop me. Plots all have unique differences about them, but in general they have some commonalities. Normally they'll have something like a visual aspect, be it a comic book or an animation or something that visually tells the story that's happening within the plot. Sometimes we will also get mini games or site challenges that happen. We also will get Battle Dome aspects or some kinds of faction wars or challenges. And some of the really good plots give us permanent site changes. In general, though, they all have an interactive aspect, a lore aspect, and a community aspect. So these are the 5 categories that we will be ranking them on to give them a score, and then we will rank them S tier to D tier. Without further ado, let's rank all of the past plots on Neopets.com. And of course, we have to start with the very first plot that Neopets ever gave us, the Virtue Pets plot. December 2000, in year 2, was the first plot that Neopets.com ever dropped, and it introduced us to Dr. Frank Sloth and his nefarious plan to mutate all of the Neopets into his minions. The storyline unfolded with the sudden appearance of the Virtue Pet space station, which ominously blocked the Neopets' sun. Players then encountered mutant versions of Neopets and learned of Sloth's scheme to enslave Neopia. The Space Fairy played a pivotal role decoding Sloth's plan, and after being captured was ultimately rescued by us Neopians. In a climactic battle, she used Sloth's own mutant ray against him, and it led to the destruction of the space station and, of course, Sloth's temporary defeat. For interactive elements, I would give it a 3 out of 5. Players all participated by collecting code stones for the Island Mystic and turning them in. We got to suggest story progression, we got to gather materials for the rocket scientist, and of course we all adopted a bunch of grundos. So while these were technically interactive, I think that they were a little bit basic, so that's why I would give it a 3. I'm going to give it a 4 for story and structure. I think that the plot featured a pretty coherent and engaging narrative throughout. It did introduce us to a significant antagonist with Dr. Sloth, and the whole story kind of culminated in that really memorable showdown. New content and mechanics, I would give that a 4 as well. It did introduce us to the Grundo species and the Virtue Pet space station, which of course expanded our little Neopets universe. However, it did lack a little bit in gameplay mechanics. Yeah, that may just have to do with like how early it was in the website's launching. For lasting impact and cultural influence, definitely going to give it a 5. I think that it established some pretty foundational lore with Dr. Sloth and the Space Fairies characters, and those have really remained steadfast within the Neopets universe. And then player engagement and hype, I think I would give that a 3 out of 5. Since it was the first plot, I think that it did gather a lot of attention, and it sort of set the stage for a lot of the future events that were going to happen. I think that the depth of engagement was a little bit limited, though, just because it was so early on in the site's development, and also because it was the very first plot. All in all, I would score it a 19. Which would place this guy right at the top of our B tier, just like 1 point away from A tier. But I think that probably since the site was so in its infancy, that hurt this one a little bit. The hunt for the Battle Dome took place in 2001, or year 3, and it was another major site-wide event, centered around this mysterious disappearance of the Battle Dome. Players had to solve riddles, find hidden clues across the site, and participate in battles to uncover what had happened. The plot revealed that a rogue programmer named Number 5 had stolen the Battle Dome code. This forced users to track him down and retrieve it. Unlike later plots, this one was relatively simple, acting more like a scavenger hunt across the site than a structured storyline with cutscenes. For the interactive elements, I have to give this a 1. There wasn't really any user interaction involvement at all. Players could click on books in the Lenny library to see the titles, but that's about it. For story and structure, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. There was kind of a structured adventure with a beginning, middle, and an end. I don't think that it was very complex or very interesting, but it was there. New content and mechanics, I would give this a 5 out of 5. It did introduce us to the Battle Dome, which became one of Neopets' biggest features. For lasting impact and cultural influence, I would also give it a 5. The Battle Dome is still a huge core feature, and it also introduced us to Maraqua, and it reinforced Sloth's villainy, and those are all still kind of key players within Neopian lore. For hype and engagement, I'm gonna have to give it a 2 though. The story was important, but since there wasn't really any participation, I don't think it connected with people the way that it would have if it was a more interactive kind of plot. All in all, I would give it a total score of 17, which puts it up here in our B tier, getting cozy in the B tier with Virtue Pets. Next up, we have a plot called The Sacrificers, which ran in November 2000, or year 2. The Sacrificers event featured 13 Neopets staff members that were all captured by Mystery Island natives, facing potential sacrifices to the deity Mumbo Pongo. Players actively participated by voting which staff member should survive, with the narrative unfolding based on what our choices were. The event concluded with Pop-Tart, Donna, the TNT member, emerging as the sole survivor. For an interactive element, I have to give this a 2 out of 5. Players could vote for staff members' survival, and it did introduce a pretty basic level of interaction, but there wasn't really any like games or challenges or anything like that we could do. For story and structure, I gave it a 3 out of 5. The event did present an engaging, albeit rather straightforward narrative. New content and mechanics, I gave it a 1 out of 5. There was no new game mechanics or content that were introduced beyond just kind of like using a voting system. For lasting impact and cultural influences, I gave it a 2. While it was memorable for its time, it did have a limited long-term impact on Neopian lore, and I don't think that people really talk about it all that much other than the fact that it is slightly problematic now. For player engagement and hype, I gave it a 3 out of 5. The voting system did engage the community and foster a lot of discussion during the time, but I feel like as soon as the votes were over, nobody really talked about it anymore. It gets a total score of 11, and that places it in our C tier. Unfortunately, not all that memorable, but you know, life goes on. Next up on the list, we have my mortal enemy, Brucey B, and the Lucky Coin. This took place from June to July in 2001, or year 3. Neopia was introduced to the Brucey B and the Lucky Coin plot, marking a significant milestone as the first to utilize Flash movie-style animation storytelling in the installments. And let me tell you, those comics were fucking dope. The narrative began with Brucey B's remarkable winning streak at the year 3 annual Neopian Cheat Championships, attributed to his mysterious lucky coin. This victory caught the attention of the nefarious Dr. Frank Sloth, my husband, who sought the coin for his own sinister purposes. The ensuing adventure led Brucey B and his companions, Princess Fernie Pooh and Kapara the Kyrie, through the haunted woods and into the uncharted sands of the Lost Desert. There they confronted Dr. Sloth, who aimed to harness the coin's power to access ancient treasures and this magical staff that was hidden within a big grand sphinx. The plot culminated in a fierce battle in Sekhmet, where Brucey B's uncharacteristic bravery and quick, thick-headed thinking thwarted Sloth's plan and restored his friends to their original forms as he safeguarded the city from destruction. I fucking hate this man. On a scale from 1 to 5, I would give the interactive elements a 4 out of 5. Players actively got to participate by challenging and defeating various Battle Dome opponents, and this kind of introduced a new layer to the Battle Dome and a new kind of intensity to the plot. Each victory that we earned gave us participants plot points, and it enhanced the engagement of the plot itself by providing this sort of competitive aspect to the event, so I think that it was cool that they integrated that. Story and structure, gotta give it a 5. The plot presented this really well-crafted narrative that had clear progression and great character development and felt like super high stakes, and it also led to the discovery of the Lost Desert, and then there was this huge just climactic battle scene at the end of it between Brucey B and Dr. Sloth with his crazy sphinx staff. So I think it provided a really memorable and immersive experience, and Honestly, like, I think that we've been chasing that high ever since. Like, I don't know if we ever have gotten back to Brucey B and Lucky Coin days. Content and mechanics, I gotta give it a 5. The event introduced the Lost Desert, like I said. It's a new world in Neopia. It became very popular. Everybody loves the lore and the vibe and everything like that of the Lost Desert. It just was a really great experience, and it offered like fresh content for players who were already sinking their teeth in. For lasting cultural impact, I gotta give it a 5 as well. The Lost Desert is huge. It has easily become a favorite land for a lot of people. We also got characters like Brucey B and Fernie Poo, who became very iconic figures in Neopia. And the plot events, I think, have kind of been referenced in other storylines, and that just sort of solidifies its significance in Neopian history, like every time it's utilized again. And finally, for player engagement, I gotta give it a 4 out of 5. I think that it had great interactive elements. I think it had a very compelling storyline. I think that it introduced new content that generated like substantial excitement within the community, and it really helped to, you know, like foster a very vibrant and engaging player base during that time. So yeah, I think that altogether, we are going to give this a 23 out of 25, and that's going to place it up in our S tier. It's absolutely fucking S tier. I may hate Brucey B, but this plot was so fucking good that like this is one of the plots that like when I'm trying to decide if I like the way that lore is going or the way that something is written on the site, I look back at the way that this plot unfolded and use this as a benchmark. Next up is the destruction of Maraqua in Year 3. Notably, this plot featured no user participation at all, and it led to pretty significant changes in the Neopian world, including a temporary removal of Maraqua as a land, and also the introduction of Croc Island. So the plot commenced with Captain Dread, who was a pirate Kiko. He arrived in Maraqua aboard his submarine, and that boat was called the Revenge. He demanded protection money from King Keltbeard. I think back then he was referred to as the Koi King. And due to recent hardships, Keltbeard declined his offer, telling the captain, "Fuck off, I don't have money for you." He threatened to destroy the city, and true to his word, he made a massive whirlpool that engulfed all of Maraqua and led to its devastation. Some consequences of this were that the koi species suddenly became very hard to get. This is actually what led to koi becoming a limited edition Neopet, reflecting their reduced numbers after losing their homeland. The underwater chef was also displaced to Mystery Island, where he began offering kitchen quests, and there was a Moroccan food and pet place that opened there as well. For the interactive elements, I gotta give it a 1 out of 5. The plot didn't really involve any kind of user participation, and it kind of just unfolded through site updates and narratives. The story and structure, I would give it probably a 3 out of 5. The narrative was pretty straightforward, and it did deal with a pretty developed conflict between Maraqua and Captain Dread, and it did lead to the city's destruction. New content and mechanics is a 2. While the plot resulted in the removal of Maraqua and the introduction of Croc Island, it didn't really introduce any new gameplay mechanics or any kind of interactive content. I gave it a 4 for its lasting cultural impact. The plot did have a significant impact on Neopian lore, leading to the temporary loss of Maraqua. Player engagement's a 2. Despite the lack of direct interaction, the plot did generate some interest due to the dramatic storyline and the substantial changes that it brought about to the world. Final ranking on this one is a 12, and that puts this guy into our C tier. Wah wah. The Croc Cup was a staff tournament that was held to celebrate the launch of Croc Island. But unlike typical Neopet plots, this event didn't really have a storyline. It was just kind of a deck ball tournament, and it featured 40 of the Neopet staff members. Remember when there was 40 people on Neopets? Players were divided into 7 leagues competing in a round-robin style format. Users could participate by predicting the tournament's winners, and those who correctly guessed Mr. Roboto as the champion got a whole 5,000 Neo points and a Croc Cup trophy. However, aside from the betting element, the event really didn't have any deep gameplay mechanics, and it made it more of like a staff showcase than a traditional Neopets plot. We're gonna go ahead and give this guy a 1 for interactive elements. Other than being able to place bets and vote, there wasn't really any kind of influence or interactivity that users had. For story and structure, there was no narrative at all. It was just structured like a tournament, so definitely gonna give it a 1. For new content and mechanics, I gave it a 3 because it did introduce Deckball and it formally launched out Croc Island, but it didn't really include any kind of lasting game mechanics or new characters beyond the event itself. I gave it a 2 for the cultural influence. Croc Island did become a part of Neopia permanently, but that event itself was pretty quickly forgotten. And for 3 out of 5 on the engagement and hype scale, I think that players were engaged in betting and discussions, but like the instant that these games were over, nobody really thought about it anymore. All in all, that brings the final score to 9, putting this guy at the tippy top of our C category. Next on our list is Neopets version 2. Neopets version 2 was a plot, but it was pretty short. It was a super intense puzzle-driven event that took place over just 4 days. It was set up on the Virtupet space station, where an old AI program that was created by Dr. Sloth was reawakened and kidnapped 4 Neopians, trapping them in an elevator. Sloth, in his usual villainous yet passive-aggressive manner, absolutely refused to help, but he revealed that 10 deactivation codes could be used, and it would shut down the AI. Players were tasked with solving complex puzzles spread out all across Neopia to find these codes before time ran out, making this one of Neopets' first true scavenger hunt-style puzzle plot. The puzzles required decoding messages, searching on pet pages, using NeoQuest gameplay knowledge, and even manipulating images in graphic programs. Eventually, players inputted all 10 codes, successfully shutting down Neopets V2 and saving the trapped children. For this event, I would give the interactive elements a 5 out of 5. Players actively had to solve puzzles, they had to search all across the website, all over Neopia, and engage with multiple different mechanics to be able to solve these puzzles. Story and structure, I would give it a 4 out of 5. The AI takeover story was really engaging, although it was very short. The stakes felt super real, but the plot could have been expanded a little bit and given more depth. For new content and mechanics, I gotta give it a 4 out of 5. This introduced us to the multi-step scavenger hunt cryptography element, but it didn't really add any sort of lasting content to the site beyond puzzles that, that format was used in later events. For the cultural influence, I'll give it a 3 out of 5. It is remembered for its difficulty and its innovative puzzle mechanics. It didn't really introduce a lot of new characters or long-term lore elements like some of the other plots. Player engagement and hype, though, I gotta give it a 5 out of 5. The time-limited nature of this made this a fucking race to solve these puzzles before the deadline had players scrambling to try to participate. The competition aspect also added this layer of urgency. All in all, this gives us a total score of 21, making Neopets V2 our very first A tier. Next up, we have a plot that was called The Search for the Crown. It was a short but impactful puzzle plot that lasted for about 2 days. This event revolved all around the theft of King Coltizan III's crown, which was meant to be displayed at the newly opened Coltizan Shrine in the Lost Desert. Instead of the crown, a hastily written note was left behind, sparking a site-wide treasure hunt where players had to solve cryptographic puzzles, decode hidden messages, and follow clues all across Neopia. The plot introduced major reoccurring villains such as the Mirka brothers and Malchus Vile, who would go on to play key roles later in Neopian crimes. Players uncovered a conspiracy involving Princess Sankara, who had betrayed her kingdom and helped to steal the crown in exchange for wealth. The hunt eventually led to Mystery Island, where players deciphered coordinates, searched hidden messages, and finally discovered the buried crown, foiling Malchus Vile's plan. This was another great Neopian puzzle-based plot. As far as interactive elements go, we definitely want to give this one a 5 out of 5. Players actively searched for clues, they solved coded messages, and they followed a scavenger hunt across multiple Neopian locations. The story structure, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. It was a tight, well-structured mystery, but since it was very short and very limited, it kind of lacked the depth of storytelling. New content and mechanics, we'd give it a 5 out of 5. It introduced us to Daddy Coltizan Shrine, which is a permanent daily feature now, as well as introducing us to Malchus Vile and the Mirka brothers, who both became reoccurring Neopian villains. Impact and cultural influence, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. I think the short length prevented it from reaching a 5 out of 5 out of this. And finally, for player engagement, I would definitely give this a 5 out of 5. It was fast-paced, everybody loved solving puzzles, the detective work that was required made this really exciting, and I think that it engaged the community in a really awesome way, and it kind of helped to pave the way for some of the future, investigative style plots. So all in all, I would give this one a 23 out of 25. And despite the score, I am going to put this one in A tier because it was only a couple days long. I think that if it was just a little longer, we would have been able to bump it up to S tier. Next up, we have the Tyranian invasion. The discovery of Tyrania happened in the year 3, and the Tyranian invasion was Neopets' first ever war plot, introducing a Battledome-based event that allowed players to participate in wave-based combat against an invading army. The plot began with a massive earthquake that revealed a hidden tunnel in the ice caves, leading to the discovery of the prehistoric land of Tyrania. Shortly after its unveiling, an invasion force led by the Monoceraptor began its assault, forcing the Tyranians to call upon Neopians to fight back. The Battledome played a central role in this event, as players fought waves of increasingly powerful enemies, including Corbat Scouts, Chia Bombers, Fire Grarls, and Tyranian Buzzes. Each wave had a fixed number of enemies, and only when enough players defeated them did the next wave unlock. Players who fought in the event received Neopoints, prizes, trophies, and permanent user lookup recognition for their efforts in the war. Gotta give this one a 5 out of 5 on the interactive element. The Battle Dome plot and allowing players to actively fight enemies and contribute to the site-wide war is just absolutely chef's kiss. The story and structure is a 4 out of 5. The invasion story was really straightforward, but it was very engaging, and there was clear progression as each wave of enemies arrived. New content and mechanics, gotta give that a 5 out of 5. It introduced us to the war format. It set the Battle Dome precedent for many future site events, and it introduced Tyrania, and that is a major Neopian land. Cultural influence, definitely a 5 out of 5. This was like Neopia's first major war. It gave us war trophies, it gave us new site lore, it gave us Tyranian army recognition, and it set the foundation for all future Neopian wars. And finally, for player hype and engagement, definitely a 5 out of 5. This was an extremely competitive, community-driven event with players that were working together to clear waves of enemies. The final Velociraptor battle was fucking legendary. With a total of 24 out of 25 points, that's gonna put our guy up into S tier. It is right on par with the Brucey B and the Lucky Coin story. Next up, we have the Usurper's Plot. This was one of Neopets' larger puzzle and logic events. It challenged players to solve the murder of King Coltizin III. This event followed directly after the Brucey B and the Lucky Coin plot, expanding on the Lost Desert lore and its political intrigue. The story unfolded when King Coltizin III collapsed at a giant feast, poisoned by an unknown assassin. His 5 dinner guests became the prime suspects, including Princess Vesa, Senator Pelpus, Advisor Wessel, Senator Barca, and Princess Sankara. Players had to analyze clues about each of the suspects' meals, habits, and potential motives to determine the true culprit. In the end, Princess Sankara was revealed to be the murderer, seeking to manipulate Visa into sending troops to her homeland. She was arrested, and Visa assumed the throne of Sekhmet. For player engagement and interactivity, I gotta give this a 4 out of 5. It required logical deduction rather than random guessing, but participation was limited since only 100 users could actually win any items. Story and structure is a 5 out of 5, a well-structured murder mystery, and it added depth to the Lost Desert politics. New mechanics will give it a 4 out of 5. It did introduce Neopia's first major sort of deduction-based puzzle event, and it influenced a lot of the future, like, logic puzzle plots. The lasting cultural influence is a 3 out of 5. Coltizin Shrine became a permanent feature, but the murder's impact on the Lost Desert lore was kind of minimal. For engagement and hype, we'll give it a 4 out of 5. I think that players really enjoyed solving the mystery, but since there was such a small number of winners, it led to a lot of frustration. With a total score of 20 out of 25, that puts this Usurper Plot up into the A tier. The Champions of Meridal plot was Neopets' first full-scale event, lasting almost an entire year, and introducing both Meridal and the Darrigan Citadel as major locations in Neopia. Unlike previous plots, this event allowed players to choose a side, leading to a split war system where participants could fight for either Meridal or Darrigan in the Battle Dome. The story followed Lisha and her friends, who were transported back in time to Meridal, where they discovered Jaren, Lisha's long-lost brother. The kingdom was at war with the Darrigan Citadel, after King Skarl stole a magical orb that once had belonged to Lord Darrigan. That motherfucker. Initially painted as the villains, the Darrigan army sought to reclaim their stolen artifact, and after a fierce battle, they won. However, the orb had been cursed by dark magic, corrupting Lord Darrigan, who became a fiery demon entity hell-bent on destroying Meridal. This led to an unexpected twist where both of the sides allied to defeat the new threat. After a climactic battle, Darrigan was overthrown, the orb was destroyed, and an uneasy peace was formed. This event was groundbreaking. It was the first war with player factions that introduced war-based avatars, and it established Meridal and Darrigan as lasting Neopian lands. In the ranking criteria, this one cleared the fucking boards. 5 out of 5 for everything. First major two-sided war, it allowed players to pick factions and to engage in battle, and it shaped the war's outcome. It was absolutely perfect. The story had a deep narrative with major character development and shocking plot twists with lasting political ramifications. Since this was our first war-based Battle Dome event, and it introduced the kind of two-sided brother against brother aspect, it gave us multiple war tiers, it gave us trophies, it gave us avatars, we fucking loved it. Cultural influence, it established the Meridal and Darrigan beef. I mean, it's a permanent Neopian fucking feud between the two of them, and it gave us 2 separate different lands. Like, what more could you ask for? Since it lasted nearly a year, there was continuous battles, there was tons of community engagement, everybody was deeply invested in the outcome. I would definitely give it a 5 out of 5 for the player hype. With a total in an unmatched 25 out of 25. That puts this at the very tippy top of the S tier, like the most points that you can possibly get. This is probably the best plot that ever was and ever will be. Next up, we have the Green Jelly plot, which was a pretty short and not very interactive plot. It ran only for 11 days and it had no comics, no puzzles, no battles, no user involvement. Instead, it just sort of played out through the new features and announcements, and it teased players with this unexpected disappearance of pets all across Neopia. The mystery deepened when TNT hinted at a returning villain from the past, although they never actually explicitly revealed who it was. Eventually, players discovered a massive green jelly in Jelly World, where the missing pets were happily feasting on jelly. After a few more days, the pets mysteriously reappeared with no explanation, and the plot just abruptly ended. While it was mildly amusing, the event left players confused and a little bit underwhelmed, as there was no direct way to participate in it or to influence the outcome. This was the last Neopets plot to have absolutely no player involvement at all, and I mean, you could probably guess why it wasn't very well adopted by everybody. Obviously, we have to give it a 1 in user participation since there wasn't any. I have to give it a 2 in story. I mean, it was kind of a fun concept, but it sort of lacked any kind of depth. Content and mechanics, so we gotta give it a 1. There wasn't really any mechanics to it at all. It was just sort of a brief nod to Jelly World's existence, or lack thereof. 3 out of 5 cultural existence. The Jelly World does not exist meme remains a huge fucking running joke in Neopian culture, and for that alone, I'm going to give this one 3 points. And for player hype and engagement, I think that people were kind of intrigued at first, but they felt really disappointed when they realized that they couldn't interact with this plot at all, and that there wasn't really anything for them to do. We're gonna give this bad boy 9 whole points, and it will go right ahead and anchor our D tier there. It was just, that mistakes were made. Then we have the Mystery Island Volcano, which took place in year 5, or 2003. This Mystery Island volcano was one of Neopets' most complex puzzle plots, featuring lots of mysteries, hidden messages, time-sensitive challenges, and unlike any previous plots, it was the first to have a dedicated Neo board that allowed players to collaborate together and to solve clues. The story began when the mysterious disappearance of several important Mystery Island residents started to happen, including the Tiki Tack Man, the Techno Master, Island Mystic, the Tiki Tour Guy. Their disappearances were linked to an ancient seal inside the Mystery Island volcano, which kept a powerful beast imprisoned. A fire fairy named Ethne appeared, claiming that Queen Fiora had sent her to warn against exploring the volcano. However, as players gathered clues, it became clear that Ethne was not working for Fiora and had her own agenda. The kidnappings were orchestrated by an evil shaman who aimed to break the ancient seal and unleash Moltenus. Players had to decode cryptic messages, gather ingredients to create potions, rescue captured islanders, and reconstruct a powerful spell to stop the shaman. However, the spell backfired, fully awakening Moltenus, who immediately ate Ethne before going on a rampage. In the last minute of Battle of Words, the players used a magic chant to banish the shaman, freeing Moltenus from his control and saving Mystery Island from destruction. These high-stakes adventures, combined with site-wide scavenger hunts, deep lore puzzles, and very hard cryptic solving, made it one of Neopets' most engaging and most fun mystery plots. For the interactive element, we have to give it a 5 out of 5. Players had lots of puzzles to solve, we found hidden messages, we performed site-wide scavenger hunts, and we had to work hard to press the storyline forward. The structure and story, we're going to give a 5 out of 5 too. This was a thrilling mystery with kidnappings, deception, shocking twists, and deep integration of Neopian lore. New content and mechanics is another 5 out of 5. This was the first plot to introduce a dedicated Neo board for collaboration, and it really set the precedent for future puzzle plots. Lasting cultural impact is a 4 out of 5. Ethne's fate and Moltenus' reveal remain one of Neopia's most memorable twists. Player engagement and hype, definitely a 5 out of 5. This time-sensitive nature and the element of creating the new Neo board made it a highly engaging plot. All in all, we are going to give this one a 24 out of 25, and that places it up here on our S tier list. Look at that, we got quite a collection going up there of fucking badass plots. The Battle for Meridel was the other half of the Champions of Meridel plot. It introduced Lord Cass as the primary antagonist, a Darrigan general who manipulated his people into continuing the war while erasing all traces of Lord Darrigan's rule. Cass was secretly guided by the Three, a shadowy trio of mysterious entities that corrupted him with their visions of power. Meanwhile, in Meridel, Cass's court dancer infiltrated King Skarl's castle, bewitching the entire royal court and allowing the Darrigan Citadel to launch a full-scale invasion. The war saw iconic battles between Jaren and Cass, and a surprise return of Lord Darrigan, who had survived the previous war. The final showdown resulted in Cass being betrayed by the Three, who vaporized him on the spot for his failure. Players engaged in wave-based Battle Dome combat, taking on massive enemy armies as they fought to defend Meridal. This was the largest war plot of its time, featuring 8 waves of opponents, including zombified peasants, war machines, and Lord Cass himself. The event also introduced new war rewards, including tiered trophies, avatars, and exclusive battle items. Gotta give this a 5 out of 5 for the interactive elements. The intense Battle Dome combat with the multiple waves, allowing players to progressively take on harder enemies for more points, made this an extremely exciting plot event. 5 out of 5 for the structure as well. The dramatic, character-driven war plot with the political manipulation, the betrayal, the high-stakes final battle, it was absolutely perfection. 5 out of 5 on the new content as well. This introduced us to the 3, and they are a major force in Neopets. 5 out of 5 on the cultural impact as well. This solidified the Meridal and Darrigan Citadel political history, and Lord Cass became an extremely iconic villain. And the 3 still remain a mystery to this day. The hype is a 5 out of 5. There was massive player involvement with millions of enemies defeated and a very highly competitive leaderboard that was set up. All in all, this is perfection. It is fun on a fucking bun. 25 out of 25. And that puts this one at the very top of our S tier. Hannah and the Ice Caves was this very ambitious war meets mystery plot that introduced us to new species, major lore expansions, and faction-based gameplay, while also expanding on the history of Terror Mountain and introducing us to the Bori species. The plot followed Hannah, Canric, and Armin as they uncovered the lost history of the Bori, which was an ancient Neobian species at the time that was frozen in time to protect the heart of the mountain from, of course, the Bringer of Night. Meanwhile, the Thieves Guild, led by Gallum, sought a gemstone rumored to grant eternal life, unknowingly awakening the Bringer, a supernatural warlord. Players could choose a side. They could either support Hannah and Armin to protect the Bori species and stop the Thieves Guild from unleashing this disaster, or they had the choice to join the Thieves Guild and fight against Hannah and their allies, aiding Canric and Gallum in the search for power. The plot's Battle Dome combat and puzzle solving kept players engaged, but several planned content pieces were cut, probably for time, including a murder mystery style Guildmaster's dinner puzzle where players would have worked through clues to expose hidden traitors within the Thieves Guild. Ultimately, the Bringer was defeated, the Bori were freed, and Canric assumed leadership of the Thieves Guild after defeating and betraying Gallum. While the core plot was well received, the cancelled puzzle segments and rushed ending kind of hurt its legacy a little bit. On the scoring side, I would give this a 4 out of 5 for the interactive elements. Since players could pick a side and battle with faction-based opponents and everything, I think that it was well adapted. However, the cancelled puzzles did seem to lower the engagement. 5 out of 5 on the story structure. It was a thrilling mix of adventure and betrayal and ancient history with world building of new characters and development. I gotta give it a 4 out of 5 on the mechanics as well. This was a great war plot. It featured a new species of the Bori, but the cancelled mechanics do lower its score a little bit. 4 out of 5 for the cultural influences. It introduced us to Bori, to Canric's rise to power, and to the whole Mycelia's revenge plot, but we never got a sequel to this, and so I think that that has limited our score a little bit here. Hopefully we'll get a sequel to it in the future. Engagement and hype, definitely strong engagement early on, but the abrupt ending with the missing puzzle content did disappoint some players, unfortunately. All in all, that gives us a total score of 22 out of 25, which puts this plot in the A tier. Next up, we have The Curse of Maraqua. This was the last major war-driven plot that we had on Neopets, and it reintroduced Maraqua as a full-fledged Neobian land after its destruction in the Destruction of Maraqua back in 2001. It featured a really deep lore faction-based battling system and kind of a controversial ranking system that affected player experiences. The story followed Captain Scarblade, a ruthless pirate who sought to conquer New Maraqua, and also King Kelpbeard, who prepared to defend his underwater city. The plot also introduced the Maraquan twin seers, Iska and Kalis, whose dreams foretold future events, although Kalis's grim prophecies did lead to her exile. After being rescued by Iska, Garen, who was a young pirate, discovered Maraqua's secret location. He stole a Maraktite sword and he vowed to protect the city from Scarblade's incoming invasion. However, he was betrayed, captured, and exiled, leading to an epic underwater battle between Maraqua's forces and Scarblade's pirate army. Players got to choose a faction, either Maraqua or the pirates, and they could either battle in the Battle Dome or complete game-based challenges as a supporter. The plot ended with King Kelpbeard defeating Scarblade, forcing the pirates to retreat, and allowing Iska and Kalis to return to the city. And while the story was compelling, the introduction of rank-based fighting mechanisms frustrated some of the players. It led to a mixed reception, despite its very strong narrative and its gameplay integration. I would give this a 4 out of 5 on interactive elements. Players could choose a side, they could battle, they could complete quests and earn prizes, making it a very interactive plot. For our story and structure, we gotta give this guy a 5 out of 5. This high-stakes war narrative with the deep lore and such well-developed characters and dynamic gave us this dramatic underwater battle finale that was honestly just fucking chef's kiss. For new content and mechanics, I would say 4 out of 5. This was one of the first plots to introduce a prize shop. It was kind of a unique structure for getting reward. Now, this did tend to frustrate some other players, so that's why we took a point away for that. Cultural influence is definitely 5 out of 5. This re-established Maraqua as a permanent Neopian land. It introduced us to Garen, to Iska, to Kalis, and it solidified Scarblade as a villain in our universe. Player engagement and hype, we have given it a 4 out of 5. Players were super excited for the war, but then they were somewhat disappointed by the ranking system and the limitations that it put on their participation. I would give this a 22, which puts it at the very bottom of our S tier list. This one is definitely up there with some of the best plots of all time, but there were just a couple little hiccups that I think may have negatively affected people's opinions about it. Just a skosh. Next up, we have the Darkest Fairy. But Chili, the Darkest Fairy wasn't a plot. I know, nerds, eat my butt. I just really wanted to include it because I thought that it fit the criteria. The Darkest Fairy was Neopets' first and only full-length console RPG. They released it on PlayStation 2, and it served as a prequel to the Altador plot, including Altador's lost history and a continuation of the Meridel and Darrigan beef. The story followed two of our protagonists, Tormund, a young Meridelian farm boy turned knight, and Princess Roberta of Brightvale, a scholarly spellcaster. And together, they fought against the rise of the Darkest Fairy, a powerful and long-banished villain seeking revenge on Neopia. The adventure spanned multiple lands, including Meridel, Brightvale, Fairyland, and the newly introduced Altador, making it one of Neopets' most expansive narratives. This game also mixed together action, RPG elements, and puzzle solving, but it was plagued by bugs and glitches, and it had a really abrupt ending. Despite this, the Darkest Fairy became a cult favorite among Neopians, inspiring fan theories, artwork, and lore discussions for years to come, even now. I have to give the Darkest Fairy a 5 out of 5 for interactive elements. I mean, this was a full fucking 3D adventure RPG with real-time combat, puzzle solving, and a sprawling open world. 5 out of 5 for the story structure as well. This was an epic fantasy narrative that expanded our Altador history, Fairyland politics, and Meridel struggles. For new content and mechanics, I gotta give this a 5 as well. This gave us fucking Altador, you guys. It gave us Tor and Roberta, new protagonists, and in this real-time RPG gameplay, it sort of set a precedent for a new way to interact with the Neopets universe. For impact and cultural influence, I gotta give this baddie a 4 out of 5. While it was beloved by the fans that did play it, it wasn't ever expanded upon. We never got a sequel or anything like that, so it's a little harder to access it today if you don't have a working PlayStation 2 or an emulator. For player engagement and hype, I would give it a 4 out of 5. It was highly anticipated, but it was plagued by bugs and crashes, and it did have that very abrupt ending. But all in all, I would give this a 23 out of 25, and that puts our Darkest Fairy up into the S tier, and nobody is surprised because that game was seriously fucking dope. Ooh, the Lost Desert plot. This introduced Quasala, it expanded our Lost Desert lore, and it set a new standard for Neopets plots. The story followed Prince Jazin, an enigmatic ruler who demanded Princess Amira's hand in marriage, claiming that an ancient contract had bound them together. When Amira refused, Jazin cursed the entire city of Sekhmet, trapping it in an undead-filled alternative dimension. You know, just like normal stuff when you tell a guy no. As the mystery unfolded, the thieves Nabila and Tomos discovered that Jazin's curse could only be broken by marrying a true princess of Sekhmet, and revealed that Nabila was actually royalty. After their love-driven marriage, the curse seemed to be lifted until Emperor Razul, Jazin's undead father, arrived, unleashing chaos on Sekhmet. Don't you hate it when your undead dad shows up and just ruins everything? He proved to be nearly unstoppable until Neopians uncovered an ancient weapon to weaken him, allowing Jazin to strike the final blow. This plot was one of Neopets' most puzzle-heavy events, featuring code breaking, glyph translation, construction activities, and rewards-based point systems that was refined for later plots after this one. For our ranking system, gotta give this guy a 5 out of 5 on the interactive elements. It was so puzzle-heavy, there was so many site alterations and construction tasks and major boss fights. Story and structure, 5 out of 5 as well. This was a really well-paced mystery, and it was engaging. It had great story arcs, it involved an undead curse, and you gotta love a satisfying baddie showdown at the end. 5 out of 5 for new mechanics as well. I mean, it did give us Quasala. It gave us the new characters of Jazin and Nabila and Razul, and you gotta love it when they bring the puzzle mechanics back around to shape the plot. It just always makes it a big staple of past plots in Neopia. For lasting cultural impact, Jazin and Nabila became major figures in Neopia, so I definitely gotta give it up for that. The plot also gave us a lot of really significant historical content, so I'm gonna give it a 4 there. And for player engagement and hype, I think that I would give it a 4 out of 5. Players really loved the mix of puzzles and storytelling, and they really liked Jazin's like anti-hero arc. It really cemented him as a fan favorite. So all in all, I would give this plot a 23, and that puts the Lost Desert plot all the way up in the S tier where it belongs. This is one of the most well-rounded, lore-expanding, and puzzle-driven plots that happened in Neopia. If you got to be a part of it, consider yourself very lucky. Next up, we have the loyalist of all of the baddies in the fucking land. We have the Altador plot, and it served as both an expansion of Neopian lore and also a sequel to the PlayStation 2 game The Darkest Fairy. Now, unlike traditional event-based plots, this one remained permanently playable on Neopets, allowing a new generation of Neopians to experience its puzzle-driven storytelling. So if you yourself haven't done this yet, it's still open and available. You can go do the Altador plot right now. Right the fuck now. But not right now, finish this video first. The story began when Queen Fiora discovered a portal to Altador. Players helped Phineas, the archivist, to open up the city's forgotten history, solving a series of constellation-based puzzles that revealed the truth behind the Darkest Fairy's curse. As players pieced together constellations, they uncovered how Jordana's memory spell had erased Altador's past to prevent the Darkest Fairy from rewriting it. The final puzzle saw players revising the spell, restoring Altador's history, and breaking the Darkest Fairy's influence. This was one of the most cerebral plots ever. It required logic, patience, observation. It lacked a combat element, but it really made up for that with its deep, lore-heavy mystery. And again, it's available right now, so if you haven't done this plot yet, you don't even have to be that smart about it. There's complete walkthroughs that are available on Jelly Neo. That's how I did it. You don't have to be a genius, because I sure as fuck am not. Rating this plot for its interactive elements, I gotta give this bitch a 5 out of 5. It was so unique with the constellation puzzles and the different site exploration with the hidden clues and all of the stuff with the water management. It was just very, very cool unraveling all the parts of this mystery. 5 out of 5 for story and structure too. It was a very well-placed, puzzle-driven, mystery, deep lore connection kind of vibe, and it tied into the Darkest Fairy and Neopian history. 5 out of 5 on new content also. I mean, this introduced Altador, the 12 council members. It brought us a fucking astronomy mechanic, and it gave us all these new forms of puzzle-based participation, which honestly I wish they would bring back for the Void Within plot. 4 out of 5 on the cultural influence. It had a major expansion within the lore, but it sort of lacked any sort of memes or strong fandom nostalgia that compared to some of the battle-based plots. For player engagement, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. This was highly engaging for puzzle fans, but since there was no Battle Dome mechanic, it did make it a little bit polarizing, and some players did find some of the steps to this to be a little bit tedious. All in all, we're gonna give this bad boy a 23 out of 25, and that puts it into the A tier. This was a very strong plot, but without the Battle Dome aspect, and with the fact that it is a little bit long-legged, it just fell shy of being an S tier. Onward to the Seer Drake's Gaze. It was a murder mystery style logic puzzle plot that introduced Shenku, a major new land in Neopia. Unlike previous war-based plots, this one was entirely puzzle-driven, requiring players to analyze, witness testimonials, uncover hidden clues, and deduce what had happened to Hoban, the ship's missing navigator. Players traveled all across Neopia's major lands, collecting contradictory stories from the different ship's crew. The final challenge was to determine who pushed Hoban overboard, and when he fell, where he landed. This was not a battle or a war plot, but instead it felt like a detective novel, forcing players to piece together conflicting narratives to solve the mystery. And while some found it very engaging, others felt that it lacked the action and the long-term impact that they had gotten used to with other Neopets plots. On the ranking side of it, for the interactive element, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5. Since it was a purely logic puzzle plot, it required a lot of deduction and critical thinking, and there was no fighting, but there was such a strong narrative that I think that it made up for it. For story and structure, I'm giving it a 4 out of 5. This unique murder mystery approach, but kind of with a less high stakes than the traditional plot, was really well received. And since it introduced Shenku and some major NPCs, I think that it definitely earned that. For the content and mechanics, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It did lack a little bit in terms of long-term gameplay. Lasting impact and cultural influence, Shenku did become a permanent site location, but the plot itself is rarely referenced or even really all that meme-worthy, so we're gonna give that a 3. And for engagement and player hype, I'm giving this a 3 as well. There was mixed reception of the puzzle fans loving it, but everybody that wanted a more Battle Dome driven plot was not all of that happy with it. So total score of 19 out of 25, and that puts this plot, The Saradix Gaze, into the B tier. It was just okay. It wasn't anything amazing, but you know, meh. Next up, we have one of my favorite plots, The Tale of Woe. And I did do a story on this one, as well as quite a few of the other plots that I forgot to talk about, but look at my channel if you want to watch it. So The Tale of Woe happened back in 2006, and it was this gothic horror-inspired plot that introduced us to Neovia, which is this Victorian-style town in Haunted Woods. The story followed Gilly, Bruno, and Sophie as they unraveled a tragic mystery that involved curses, ghosts, and a sinister potion peddler, Mr. Crowley. It featured really dark themes and intricate puzzles, and it had this super eerie atmosphere around it, so naturally I loved it. The plot was very heavy puzzle-based. It had some alchemy mixing games, some grave digging games, some logic-based challenges. It was also one of the first plots to introduce win caps in the Battle Dome, ensuring that combat wasn't the only way to earn points. And while it wasn't as combat heavy as some of the war plots, it did have a significant battle component where you were fighting the shadowy spirits, and it got increasingly difficult, ending up with the monstrous Mayor Thumbert as the final boss. The Tale of Woe remains one of the most beloved Neopets plots, largely due to its gothic horror aesthetic, its deep story, and its unique gameplay mechanics. For the interactive elements of this plot, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5. The fact that it had the different kinds of puzzle mechanics and code breaking and Battle Dome fights, I think made it very strong. For story and structure, definitely a 5 out of 5. This is one of the best written plots that we've ever gotten, and of course we all love the mystery gothic horror vibes and the tragic character arcs. New content and mechanics, I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. It did introduce us to Neovia and new Battle Dome mechanics and unique puzzles, but Neovia didn't really ever come into play after this plot, and there wasn't a lot of permanent gameplay changes. Lasting impact and cultural influence, definitely 5 out of 5. Neovia did become a permanent location in the Haunted Woods, and The Tale of Woe has remained one of the most beloved plots that players usually still talk about to this day. Player engagement and hype, let's do 4 out of 5. Strong engagement, but the puzzle-heavy section did slow some players down who prefer a less knife fight kind of plot. All in all, I would give this plot a 23 out of 25, and you know where that puts us. Seated pretty comfortably up here in the S tier where it belongs, because it fucking rocks. Suck it, Brucey B, it's still better than you. Next on the list, we have the Wand of Wishing. We were introduced to this plot in year 8, 2006, as a PlayStation portable game. This was an action-adventure game that introduced us to Petaria, a pet-centric alternative universe. The story followed Fluffy, the player's chosen pet, as they pursued Arcos and his werehound companion across Petaria to stop them from gaining the Wand of Wishing. The game heavily featured classic RPG elements like exploring different environments, like forests and desert and icebergs and air temples, and combat against bosses and minions. There were some puzzle-solving aspects and item collection as well, where you had to summon 6 different elemental guardians to aid in the final battle. It was later retconned into Neopian lore through Operation Pet Pet Park in 2008, which suggested that the wand may have also created the Pet Pet Park. However, since Pet Pet Park was eventually discontinued, the game now exists only as a semi-canon kind of state. Despite its intriguing world building, the Wand of Wishing was never really released as a site-based plot, and thus it had no direct impact on Neopets gameplay. For interactive elements, I gotta give this guy a 4 out of 5. It was a full-fledged RPG mechanic, and it had the exploration and the puzzle solving. It just didn't really have any connection into the site. I'll give it a 4 out of 5 on the storytelling and structure. There was some pretty expansive lore with Petaria world building, and the elemental guardians and the sort of layered villain aspects to the plot. New content and mechanics, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. We did get Petaria out of this and the deeper pet-based storylines, but it had no lasting impact on Neopets.com, and it's almost as if it doesn't exist anymore. Cultural impact, we gotta give it a 2 out of 5. This did tie players into Pet Pet Park, which was great while it lasted, but it made its long-term influence minimal since it was taken away. And I'm gonna give it a 3 out of 5 on the engagement and hype. It was very limited to PlayStation Portable players, making it a lot less accessible compared to the browser-based Neopets plot or even the PlayStation 2-based Darkest Fairy. So all in all, I would give this guy a total of 17 points, and that puts it up in the B tier. Next up, we have the Journey to the Lost Island. This was a 2007 plot, year 9, and the Journey to the Lost Island followed Professor Hugo Ferris Fairweather's expedition to the mysterious moving island filled with enormous pets. The story combines scientific discovery, adventure, and survival horror elements as the group struggled against massive creatures and tried to escape. Despite a strong start, the plot was notably short, lasting only about a month, and it had a very open-ended conclusion that was never really explained or followed up. The coming soon page hinted at a continuation, but Neopets never revised the storyline. Players engaged through 3 different puzzles and 3 different battledom fights, making it one of the simplest and most streamlined Neopets plots that we've ever encountered. Giving it a 3 on the interactive elements, while the puzzles and the battledom fights were there, they were a little limited on engagement compared to some of the other plot. A 4 out of 5 on the story structure, because this was an exciting, adventure-filled narrative that had strong characters and development. However, the unresolved ending does hurt its score a little bit. I'm gonna give it a 3 on the new content and mechanics. It did introduce giant pets, and it hinted at a larger Neopian lore, but there were no real lasting mechanics that came from it. 2 out of 5 for cultural influence. It had potential for a sequel, but it was kind of abandoned, and I think that really helped to minimize its impact. I'll give it a 3 out of 5 on the hype as well. Initially, it did have some hype, but that kind of washed over quickly, especially since a sequel was never made. It just feels really unfinished. So in total, we will give this plot a 15 out of 25, and that puts our guy at the top of the B category. Just not really anything all that impressive at the end of the day. 2008 gave us the return of Dr. Sloth. This was in year 10 in Neopia. The return of Dr. Sloth was kind of a cool plot. After years of build-up, Dr. Sloth made his grand return in one of his most highly anticipated war plots in Neopian history. The Virtue Pets space station fell under attack as Sloth launched his Kreludite-powered munition plan to transform all of Neopia. The resistance, led by Commander Valka, Gorix, and Cyrilla, fought back against Sloth's elite forces, including Yelana's Skyfire, Garu's strike team, and the robot-enhanced troops that Sloth had on his side. Meanwhile, Sloth's manipulations turned Krelidor's factions against each other, allowing him to harvest Kreludite for his mutant experiment. The final act saw Gorix and Cyrilla breaking into Sloth's flagship, where they reclaimed the Space Fairy's token, a powerful artifact that trapped Sloth inside and ended his invasion. But with Yelana, Parallax, and the Space Fairy token still floating around in space, the threat of Dr. Sloth was far from over. This plot featured puzzle-based gameplay, limited wave battledome combat, and side activities, including scientific testing of the Space Fairy's token. The limited win caps on the battledome enemies made this a little bit more of a controlled war event, preventing extreme point farming, but also frustrating some of the hardcore battledomies. I'd give this a 4 out of 5 for its interactive elements, including the puzzle solving and the battledome fights and research tasks. But with the win caps that they put on the battledome fights, I think that it did have a little bit of a negative effect on the overall adoption of the plot. 4 out of 5 on the storyline. It was strong stories. It felt like a high-stakes battle. There were new characters, and of course we love a classic Dr. Sloth shenanigan. The ending did tease a sequel, however, and there has never been a direct follow-up, so TNT, if you can hear this, we would love you to reprise this. That would be fucking fantastic. 4 out of 5 for the content. We did get, bounty hunters and villains and Space Fairy tokens. However, the battledome system did feel a little restrictive compared to some of the past war plots. 3 out of 5 for the lasting cultural impact. Sloth remains at large and a major Neopian villain, but his defeat was a little bit ambiguous, and since there's been no continuation, it kind of leaves a question mark. The plot did introduce Yelana Skyfire, but she hasn't really been heavily utilized since, which is too bad because her name is fucking badass. 4 out of 5 on the hype. The anticipation for Sloth's return was massive, but win limits did frustrate a lot of the battledome players, and the Space Fairy token activities were pretty fun, but the plot felt a little bit shorter than what we kind of had all initially expected. I would give this plot a 19 out of 25, and that would put it in the A tier. I think there's a couple little improvements they could have made to get to S tier, but it was pretty darn close. The year 2009, or year 11, brings us to the Atlas of the Ancient. This plot introduced the land of Maltera, Neopia's subterranean magma-fueled city, and it also brought back Ruxton A. Colchester III for another adventure-filled expedition. The plot followed Clara Chatham, Ruxton, and his assistant Geordie as they traveled across Shanku, Eltador, Fairyland, and Terror Mountain, and an uncharted volcanic island in search of artifacts tied to ancient disasters. Their journey revealed the lost city of Maltera, a hidden civilization founded by scientists and mystics who built a core stabilizer to regulate Neopia's volcanic activity. With the core dangerously unstable, Ruxton and the team gathered ancient materials to repair it, encountering the exiled mystic Igneot and the magma Neopet. With their help, the core was stabilized, and Maltera officially joined the Neopian map. For the first time, a Neocache challenge was introduced, allowing users to complete extra premium plot steps for exclusive NC prizes. Gameplay included point-and-click puzzles, flash games, and community participation. In total, I would give this a 4 out of 5 for its interactive element. It did have the point-and-click puzzles and the flash games that I mentioned before, along with some item collection tasks, but lacking a Battle Dome aspect is always going to take a point off. A strong exploration-driven plot with tense moments and world building, but the finale felt rushed and it left some unanswered questions. 4 out of 5 for content and mechanics. It did introduce us to Maltera, it gave us the Magma Neopets paint job, and give us some new pet. Also, the NC challenge, mixed reviews on that. For the lasting cultural impact, I'd give it a 3 out of 5. While Maltera did become a permanent Neopian world, it sort of lacks any kind of ongoing lore relevance, and it feels a little bit underdeveloped after the plot has ended. Player engagement and hype, I'd give it a 3 out of 5. The Neopian community really enjoyed the mystery and the exploration aspects, but again, lacking the Battle Dome and the high stakes conflict kind of hurt its engagement a little bit. All in all, we're going to give it a 17 out of 10, which puts this plot in the B tier. Oh, I'm so sick of this video. Are you guys sick of this video yet? Fuck, okay, we're almost done. Okay, bringing in a banger to shake off the cobwebs. This is the Fairy's Ruin, probably my favorite plot. This took place in 2010 or year 12. This plot had fucking everything. It had the petrification of every single fairy. It had the fall of Fairyland. It had the rise and fall of Xandra. Like, what more could you ask for? After a mysterious magical attack turned all of the fairies to stone, Neopia fell into a panic and chaos. King Jazin, King Altador, Captain Bryneth, and an infamous thief named Hanzo all formed a reluctant alliance to uncover the truth behind what the fuck was going on. Their journey took them through Fairyland, the Haunted Woods, and Brightvale, and eventually to the Lost Ruins as they encountered shadow wraiths and pieced together the mystery. Ultimately, the true villain was Xandra, debatable, a brilliant but embittered sorceress who believed that the fairies hoarded their magic instead of helping Neopians with it. She orchestrated the entire disaster, planning to rule Neopia by herself. But in a final twist, Hanzo outsmarted Xandra, using her own artifact against her and petrifying her in the process. And it crashed Fairyland into the surface of Neopia, where the remnants remain on the ground to this day. I mean, it's no fucking surprise here, right? This bitch gets 5s all the way through. There was Battle Dome fights, scavenger hunts, fearless deeds made for one of the most engaging multi-step plots ever. The story structure was amazing. It was high stakes, it was character driven, there was mystery and twists and betrayal and emotional moments, and there was Xandra. There was Xandra! It was just brilliantly fucking executed. We got achievements, we got new enemies, we got expanded lore, we crashed Fairyland into the surface of the fucking planet. Like, how much more iconic can you get? And Xandra's fate is kind of still a mystery out there, so we still have a little bit of a cliffhanger hanging on for the future, because you know my bitch is gonna be coming back eventually. There was massive player participation, there was daily speculation and intense battles and thrilling story updates, and the boards were just lighting up. No surprise here, 25 out of 25 for my girl Xandra. That puts it firmly in the motherfucking S tier. Air horns. Definitely the best plot that's out there. Xandra is my girl, don't worry, she will be vindicated, she will come back someday. We love you, Xandra. The Croc Island disappearance was in year 13 or 2011. It was an event that shook up Neopia's pirate stronghold when the massive sea monster known as the Kraken seemingly tore Croc Island apart. Only a single island remained, occupied by the self-proclaimed leader, Garvel McGrill. With McGrill rallying survivors, Neopians set out to search the seas for Croc Island's scattered remains. Historical records hinted that the island was never a single landmass to begin with, but a cluster of islands that had once been merged. The event involved players scouring the waters and pieces of Croc Island and participating in Kudoku, a pirate-themed Sudoku puzzle. Once all the islands were recovered and reassembled, McGill took full credit for the restoration, declaring himself the governor of the new Croc Island. With his mansion towering over the island, he rewarded helpers, conveniently ensuring that his power remained secure. The event permanently redesigned the Croc Island map, adding Scurvy Island nearby, and introducing anchor management as a new daily. We're gonna give a 3 out of 5 for the interactive elements. The search for the islands and the Kudoku were fun but very repetitive. The event lacked the complexity of larger plots, and it didn't really have much of a storyline. We'll do 4 out of 5 on the story structure. The Kraken attack was an exciting setup, and McGirl's kind of political power grab made for an interesting narrative and twist, but there was not a lot of complexity to it. For new content and mechanics, we're gonna give it a 4 out of 5. It introduced a redesigned Croc Island, it introduced Scurvy Island, and it gave us a new daily with anchor management. I'll also do a 4 out of 5 for the lasting cultural influence. Croc Island's new layout remains permanent, and the Kraken is now a part of Neopian lore forever. 3 out of 5 for player engagement and hype. The event was shorter and it was a little less intense than a full plot, but I think that players were excited about Croc Island's new fate. So all in all, we will go ahead and we will give this plot a 18 out of 25, which places the Croc Island disappearance solidly within the B tier. All right, the spooky food eating contest of 2013. It started as a lighthearted competition in Neovia, but it quickly spiraled into chaos when contestant Scarlet transformed into a fucking monster. As the town descended into fear, monster hunting brothers Corbin and Kel stepped in, revealing that they had spiked the food with a potion that was meant to subdue the monster. But their measurements were a little bit off. Scarlet fled into the Hidden Vault, an ancient crypt that was filled with curses and traps and cultists and all sorts of bizarre creatures. With help from the local eccentrics Bathington and Tippins, the heroes ventured inside and they tracked Scarlet down. The vault proved to be a labyrinth of oddities, from dragons to a cult that was dedicated to toes, and after days of exploration, they cornered Scarlet and they used their enchanted musical plants to lull him into a gentle sleep. The brothers then escorted the monster to a secret valley hidden in the mountains between the Haunted Woods and Shanku, where Scarlet was reunited with his family of similar creatures. The event later became the foundation for the Grave Danger daily activity. Interactive elements will give this a 4 out of 5. Players engaged in cheering and booing mechanics, melody puzzles, and the vault exploration. However, vault exploration became very repetitive over time. Story structure will give it a 5 out of 5. This was a great blend of mystery, horror, humor, music, and the spooky food contest setup leading into the monster hunting adventure was very unique and very well paced. For content and mechanics, I'm going to do 4 out of 5. This introduced new mechanics for the community interaction, like the vault exploration and Grave Danger, and also the musical plant puzzles. But the vault was later added and adapted into Grave Danger, so it isn't exactly how it was introduced in the plot. For the new mechanics, I'd give this a 4 out of 5. We did have the vault exploration and kind of musical plant puzzles, which were really cool, and later they did adapt the vault into Grave Danger. I'll also do a 4 out of 5 for the lasting cultural influence. Having the new daily of Grave Danger is really cool, and Corbin and Kel kind of solidified their place in Neopian lore during this plot. However, Scarlet's story was a little bit largely self-contained, and she hasn't really come up much after this plot. Engagement and hype, I do a 4 out of 5. We love a spooky aesthetic, so that had a huge draw, and the vault created a sense of deep exploration, but some players found the vault progression to be a little bit tedious and repetitive. In total, I would give this plot a 21, and that places it up into the A tier. All right, bestie, put up your dukes, because this time we are talking about the War for the Obelisk. This was in 2013, or year 15, and the War for the Obelisk began with an earthquake in Tyrrhenia, which unearthed a mysterious spire. What seemed like an archaeological discovery quickly spiraled out of control as 6 different factions arrived, each vying for control over the dig. The Thieves Guild, led by Canric, sought to steal some of the secrets and sell them. The Sway, a secretive organization, believed that the obelisk must be controlled from the shadows. The Order of the Red Irisim, a powerful mage society, saw it as a tool to protect magic. And the Brute Squad, a militant force, wanted to wield it as a powerful weapon. The Seekers, however, were a scholarly group who wanted to study its historical significance. And then, of course, the Awakened, an undead collective, thought that the obelisk contained cake. The factions waged war for weeks in wave-based battledom combat, culminating in a final battle against spirits that manifested from the leaders' deepest fears. And after an intense battle, the Sway emerged victorious, gaining control over the obelisk and unlocking the Oracle, a powerful being who granted them boons, special site-wide rewards. The war didn't end there, though. It became a perpetual battle, with factions continuing to fight in smaller skirmishes for the Oracle. This is really cool because this became our obelisk battle that we do on a interval basis, where we still get the opportunity to side with these different factions and try to earn the different site rewards. So for the interactive elements, I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5. This is a massive battledome war with multiple faction waves and final faction bosses. It added the small excavation puzzle at the start, which I think kept it really interesting. For story and structure, I'm going to give it a 4. The factions added a great depth to the storyline, but the obelisk's true purpose was never really revealed. So the Oracle boons were a nice creative twist, but we never really got any answer as to what was going on there in the first place. For content and mechanics, 5 out of 5. This was the first major faction-based war since the Champions of Meridel, and introducing the boons as the site fixture and the faction selection, I think, is a really cool way to continue making this ongoing war system stay interesting. 5 out of 5 for lasting cultural impact. I mean, the Oracle Wars continue to this day, and players still choose factions and fight for boons, as well as trying to get the awesome site rewards. The Neopian War reshaped politics, and it made Canric, Rosala, and the Duchess major figures. And 4 out of 5 for the hype. I think that the war was highly competitive, but that some players felt a little bit of fatigue by the end of fighting. The final boss wave had balance issues, leading to a glitch that forced 2 bosses to be re-released, but other than that, it was pretty solid. In total, I would give this plot 23 out of 25 points, and that puts it up in the S tier. No surprise, as it's continuing to this day, and we fucking love site themes and avatars. Next up, Year 16 brings us Desert Diplomacy, an event that was a mystery-driven logic puzzle that was set within Sekhmet. Princess Amira hosted a trade summit with several rulers, but by morning, each leader had been robbed. The event centered on gathering clues, interrogating informants, and solving the thefts. Some examples are Prince Amira's grand speech scroll that was stolen, King Altador's royal telescope, Queen Davila's wedding ring, Prince Lunara's magical amulet, and King Skarl's illuminated manuscript. Clues pointed to 6 different thieves' guilds, each using unique tactics to pull off the heist. Players had to collect evidence to correctly deduce the culprit's methods and the times of each of the thefts. Unlike most of the plots, the Desert Diplomacy plot had no battle dome component, no major conflict, and no trophies. Instead, it focused entirely on clue gathering and logical deduction. I would give this a 4 out of 5 for the interactive elements. It was a fun detective-style mystery event, and I think that players had to gather a lot of clues with dailies. They engaged in these logical deduction puzzles, and rather than doing battles, they engaged in logic deduction puzzles. However, some people find that daily kind of clue collection to be very repetitive. I'm gonna give it a 5 out of 5 on the story and structure. It was a very tightly woven mystery with a well-executed investigation theme, and each of the factions had a really distinct method of theft, and the clues kind of helped build suspense over time. I'll do a 4 out of 5 on the mechanics as well. This was a great mystery event, and it encouraged problem solving rather than direct action. However, it lacked major gameplay variant. 3 out of 5 on the lasting cultural impact. While it was very well received by mystery fans, it had no real lasting impact on Neopian lore or site mechanics, and there wasn't really a lot of big plot shakeups. 4 out of 5 for the player engagement. I think that the mystery kind of kept players engaged, but some people felt that it lacked urgency due to the slower pace. There was also no battles or high stakes moments, and that kind of hurts excitement. So all in all, I would give it a 20 out of 25, and that would put the Desert Diplomacy plot into the B tier. I wasn't around for this next plot, so I didn't even know that it existed until I started doing this video, but this is the Portal Activation Center event, also called the Molterra Mystery. It introduced a revamp of the random event system and a new daily, the Random Event Machine, or, the coincidence. The event revolved around Dr. Landelbrot, a Lutari scientist orbiting Neopia, whose malfunctioning Confusionator caused random events to vanish. A cryptic message led players to a hidden Molterran lab where a portal had been reactivated. The coincidence spaceship was revealed as the source of Neopia's random event. Players helped Dr. Landelbrot repair his machine by collecting and delivering random junk items. Upon repair, random events returned, restoring balance to its chaotic nature. Unlike traditional plots, the Portal Activation Center was a short event with a very clear goal: fix the fucking Confusionator. It had puzzle solving and fetch quest mechanics, but no battle dome, no war, no faction conflict, or anything like that. For gameplay and interactive mechanics, I'd give this a 3 out of 5. A mix of lights out puzzles and fetch quests were kind of the whole dynamic here. The puzzles were engaging, but they got a little bit tedious and they lacked in variety. We'll do a 4 out of 5 for the story structure. This was a very unique sci-fi plot that expanded Neopian lore with a fresh perspective on random events. 4 out of 5 for the new content. It did give us the coincidence, a permanent feature, and it did tie into some existing side events. For lasting impact, I'd do a 4 out of 5. I kind of liked the revamp on the random event systems, and it ensured that it had a direct impact on gameplay, so that's kind of cool. And a 2 out of 5 for player engagement. This lacked any of the kind of high stakes, super interesting things that we have for most plots, so a lot of players found it forgettable due to the simplistic sort of fetch quest nature. So all in all, I would give this plot a total of 17 out of 25, and that would put it in the C tier. I mean, it probably earned enough points to go in the B tier, but I've never gotten anything good from the coincidence, so fuck you, Dr. Landelbrot, stop stealing my landfish. Next up is the Games Master Challenge, which took place in 2014. There were 14 total gaming challenges that were spread across 7 days. Players could earn gold or green badges based on their completion time. Some challenges were mystery-based, requiring players to figure out the game from cryptic descriptions. There was no story or plot, it was purely just a gaming event with scores and challenges. For the interactive element, I would give this a 5 out of 5. It was purely gaming focused, and it required actual skill and quick reflexes. It was a little different of a challenge, but it was very engaging. Story and structure is a 2. There wasn't really any story or lore integration, so it feels a little bit less immersive compared to some of the other plot events. But for the new content, I'd give it a 3. They reused some of the past game mechanics rather than introducing new ones, but the gold and green badge system was kind of a nice twist. 4 out of 5 for the impact. It was a beloved event for gamers, but it didn't really add anything to history or lore. However, it did give us some shinies for our lookups, and we fucking love that. Engagement and hype would be a 4. There was strong engagement amongst the most competitive players, but casual players struggled with the tougher challenge a little bit. So I would give this in total an 18 out of 25, which would place this side event in our B tier. 2017 gave us the Wraith's Resurgence, which was a direct sequel to the Fairy's Ruin, the Altador plot, and the Darkest Fairy video game. It marked the return of the Darkest Fairy herself. The plot featured a blend of battles, puzzle solving, and lore-heavy twists, making it one of the most intricate Neopian storylines in years. Some of the key story elements were the fairy festival getting sabotaged, leading to the discovery of Kaya, a Shinku-born fairy with strange foresight abilities. Wraith attacks escalated, but the captured wraiths turned out to just be transformed Neopets instead. The Darkest Fairy returns, having been revived after the events of Fairy's Ruin. And Kaya was an imposter all along. The real Kaya had been kidnapped and replaced by the Darkest Fairy to manipulate Neopians. The final confrontation involved stopping a massive poison attack on Neopia before the Darkest Fairy fled. 3 out of 5 for the interactive elements. There was Battledome fights, puzzles, and achievements that kept players engaged. However, the pacing dragged on at times, and the battles could be very repetitive. We'll give it a 4 out of 5 for the lore and structure. Being a sequel to the Darkest Fairy, Kaya's twist was well executed, and the narrative felt impactful, but a lot of it relied on the previous plot. 4 out of 4 for the mechanics. The achievement system was well integrated, and the Battledome bosses had unique mechanics, but there was no prize shop, so it limited customization. I'll give it a 4 out of 5 for the cultural influence. The Darkest Fairy's return left unresolved conflicts, keeping players invested in future lore, but it did kind of leave some loose ends. And finally, 2 out of 5 for the engagement and hype. There was strong community engagement at first, but delays between rolling it out really hurt the excitement. All in all, I would give this guy a 17 out of 25. I feel that it deserves a low place in the A tier. Next up, we have Lyra and the Lost Heirloom in 2018, or year 20. It was a mini plot that unfolded alongside a Lost Desert map revamp, loosely tying into the Legends and Letters mobile game. It featured political intrigue, betrayal, and an intense coup in Sekhmet as Queen Amira faced an uprising led by General Arun, while Lyra, the daughter of the corrupt warden of the Lost Desert, fled her father's control with a stolen heirloom sword. This featured some standalone side stories focusing on Lyra's personal journey, rather than a large-scale Neopian conflict. There was a grounded political narrative rather than a supernatural or world-ending kind of crisis, and there was 2 mini-games and story chapter participations that determined player progress. This did tie into Neopia's existing Lost Desert lore, and it did revisit characters like Queen Amira, King Jazin, and Princess Visa. It also directly referenced past events like the Lost Desert plot and the War for the Obelisk, making it feel more like a continuation of Neopian history than its own standalone event. I'd give it a 3 out of 5 for the engaging elements. There was really only 2 mini-games that made participation feel like anything at all, but the achievements did add a little bit of variety. A 4 out of 5 for the story and structure. This was a very well-paced political thriller, but it lacked a grand climax or deep player involvement in major decisions. 3 out of 5 for the content. The expanded Lost Desert lore introduced electoral leadership in Sekhmet, but no major gameplay innovations or mechanics came from it. And we'll give it a 4 out of 5 for the lasting cultural influence. A strong expansion of Lost Desert lore existed, but it didn't really change any kind of gameplay systems or introduce anything site-wide. And finally, a 3 out of 5 for the hype. There was moderate excitement among lore fans, but it lacked strong incentives for non-story focused players. So all in all, I would give the Lyra and the Lost Heirloom plot a 17 out of 25, and that would place it in the B tier of our category system. And since this one was so closely tied to Legends and Letters, I'm going to include that in the same area. Holy fuck, we did it, y'all. We are on the final plot that we're going to be covering in this video, The Void Within, which is currently ongoing. It is a mystery-driven plot that is expanded upon the Wraith's resurgence and the Neopians' cosmic horror element. It's introduced us to a new villainous entity, the Sleeper, whose influence has seeped into Neopia, corrupting Neopians' distorted reality. This was the first major Neopets plot post-Jumpstart, so this marks a return to site-wide storytelling after a very long year-long hiatus. There is some investigative gameplay, like some puzzles and clues that we have to solve. There's a cosmic horror element and narrative to the Sleeper's mysterious presence, the growing Wraith's corruption, the mysterious painter. We don't have a lot of answers on these things yet, but there's a lot of moving pieces. There's also returns of some major characters like Fiora, Kaya, and lots of other people that are playing supporting roles kind of in the background of this plot. We have a lot of collection and mini games and everything like that. So far it's been a pretty decent plot from a interaction standpoint, but I do feel like the story is a little bit lacking, and I don't think that they're really rolling it out at a very good pace. Altogether, I would give it a 4 out of 5 for the interactive elements. They have given us a lot of fun mini games and everything like that for this. I'd give it also a 4 for the story and structure. I like the story so far, but it's like super fucking basic and slow, so it's really hard to connect with it and, you know, feel anything about it. Mechanics, I'd give it a 4. I mean, it has given us some new mechanics. It just all feels very mechanical. There's not a lot that I'm deeply connecting with. The lasting cultural influence, I've got to give it a 4 right now, just because it's the only thing we've had for so long that we're all grasping at straws and begging TNT to make something fucking relevant happen, please. And for player hype, we were all super hyped about this. I'm gonna give it a 4 though, because it's been on hiatus for so long that I think that some of us are starting to kind of forget about it. So all in all, I would give this a 20 out of 25, and that would put this in the bottom of the A tier, and I feel like I'm even being a little bit generous there, but time will tell on The Void Within whether it is a flop or not. So that does it. That concludes our rundown of the past plots with Neopets.com, including our current Void Within plot. Thank you so much if you watched up until this point. Feel free to like this video, give me a follow, put in the comments what your favorite plot was, and until next time, remember, life can be pretty crazy out there. Stay chilly, my friends. Bye!